Thank you so much for coming today. Very, very happy to have you around. I'm Alex. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Upflow. My co-founder Barnaby is somewhere in the room, just right here. And we're very, very happy to host you today around a product launch. We'll talk a little bit about that later, but most importantly around our users and partners. And we're very happy to have you today as well. There's team members, there are prospects, there are existing users of Upflow, there's partners, and we're very happy to have you all around tonight. We do this on a regular basis, trying to share like what we know from the market, what we've seen, trying to get a little bit better. And we're very happy to have experts helping you and helping us tonight. Before I get started, I'm going to tell a little anecdote that I think I've told like 1 million times to the team now. And it was the time when I was actually, and we were with Barnaby in San Francisco. It was a while back. And I was interviewing a CFO of a very, very large tech company. And the CFO was telling me, like, look, Alex, we are doing an incredible job at prospecting our customers, onboarding them, serving them while they use the product. When they have an issue, we have the best customer support. Everything is fine. But the moment where we send them an invoice, they're starting having a miserable experience. And we just don't know how to change that for the time being. And I think it was interesting because this relates to a lot of things that we try to do at Upflow, try to change like how payments and how you get paid by your customers is actually like part of the overall customer experience and not only like an afterthought or something that is like, you know, that you kind of like do because you don't have any other choice, but have to make it happen. So that was really the beginning of it. And you know, fast forward 4 years later, 5 years later, I think we've made a lot of changes in this space, and the space is changing quite a lot. And I'm glad to have with us people that can help us see where the world is going on that respect. But I'm very happy to first introduce our guests tonight. We have Ben from Stripe, Gite from ParcelLab, and Xavier from Botify. If you want to just introduce yourself, maybe Ben, if you want to get started.
Great. Thanks, Alex. Hi, I'm Ben Thirlwall. I head up the SaaS platform customer group at Stripe. So we work with organizations like Upflow to embed payment and money movement capabilities into their software stack and really help power a lot of their commercial growth and solve for the payment needs of their customer base. So I'm based in London, but we have a team that are responsible for customers all around Europe.
Hi, thanks, Alex. So I'm JT. I work for ParcelLab. It's a German startup in the online retailer sphere. We sell a post-purchase experience to our customers to have a flawless experience and try to get retention for their customers. I'm based in Belgium, but we have a global team, especially in Europe, mainly focused on Europe and the US.
Hello, thanks Alex for the invitation. So I'm Xavier, VP Finance at Botify. I have been with the company since like 6 years, and Botify is a SEO platform that helps business to optimize their website to better insertion engine and visibility. So the company has been created like 10 years ago and has established presence so first of all in Europe, then in the US, and finally in APAC 2 years ago. And we have like 250 employees around the world as of today. Sorry, my note. So we are operating as a SaaS business, and we have like 400 customers globally speaking. And in terms of payment complexity, I will say that we have the perfect client, as we have like multiple currency, large amount of invoice, and different localization and stuff like that.
You mean the perfect client for Upflow, right?
Yeah. Sorry.
Which is good. I don't know if you have. You also probably have the perfect customers, I'm sure, but that's right. And just for all of you to know, JT and Xavier are absolute legends here at Upflow. Maybe we just remove the posters of them on the wall, just saying like, you know, just this is the perfect user. We should try to find more of them. So thank you so much for your trust in our product and the continued partnership. We're very, very happy to have you using the product. I'm actually going to give you the floor to get started on this first simple question, and I'm sure the audience We'll just relate to some of those. But can you tell us a little bit more about, like, you know, in your business, and Xavier already started speaking about this, but what are the kind of like typical issues or trouble that you see when you need to get paid by your customers? And I think what you just said, Xavier, and if you maybe you want to start, is just relating to also the wide difference of like customers that you have.
So in terms of customers, so we have like enterprise customer and then mid-market, and we have few customers as an agency. So we cannot, you know, address your invoice or send your invoice using the same process to this different type of customer. So in terms of painful point to get paid, I think that the first of all, it's to be sure that your sales cycle, your internal process are like correctly updated to be sure that you will get the information in terms of payment. I mean that you need to be sure that your CRM is correctly up to date. All of like the finance information are correctly understood and share with the finance team. And then I think that you have to know your customer. I mean that some customer wants to have, like, for example, a different invoicing process. They want to have like a PO number. They want to have like an invoice with like some personalization. And sometimes you also have like some exceptions, so they don't want to have like VAT or like a lot of information. So this is why you really need, you know, to know as soon as possible how your customer wants to be invoiced and which information they want to have.
That sounds really nice.
Yeah.
Well, I think you said it all, but I think definitely for ParcelLab, the problem is not a matter of are you going to get paid. It's not like a really credit risk exposure. It's more like when are you going to get paid, and that's a bit like where automation has its limits as well. You need to know your customers, as you said, and it's also understanding as quickly as possible what type of specificities they have, and just figure out when you're going to get paid, and not being played by your customers, obviously. And definitely in B2B SaaS, and Alex, you can confirm this, cash is king. So the sooner you're getting paid, the better it is. And obviously all the business is founded on that, and financial modeling is based on how much cash you can collect.
Do you see some specific difference in terms of, like, you know, countries? So I know that both of you operate like globally. Like, do you need to handle this on a specific basis because of different countries? Or is there any other specificities that you see in different segments or anything?
Well, you have countries which are much more strict on being paid late, especially in the Nordics. So it's great to do business over there. They tend to pay before due date. So honestly, I recommend doing business in the Nordics. But for the rest, I think it's more of a behavior from the customers. If you reach year end, they will always slip a bit because, you know, the cash is going to be on their balance sheet. So they like to show that as well. So there's a bit of tricks that are in the finance world. For me, it's more a matter of fact of having the proper payment terms when they're negotiated. Because, you know, no matter if they're 30, 90, 180 for some companies, sometimes if they pay on time, you know what to expect. It's when they slip that starts to be a bit tricky and annoying for many, many reasons. But if they pay on time, that's only what you can wish.
We were talking a little bit about this, Xavier, before preparing this chat. But, like, for example, in the US, do you see some specific differences that you have in Europe with your customers, like in terms of like how they pay and things you need to anticipate as part of like operating globally?
I think that it really depends on of how, you know, they want to receive their invoice. In the US, like a huge part of our customer wants, you know, to use like a supplier portal. So it's super easy. You just have, you know, to have your PO number open. You upload the invoice, and then you will get paid according to the payment term. And this is really, you know, for me the difference versus Europe and the US. They are more using like supplier portals, procurement tools to manage their invoice process. Yeah,
more advanced and more like equipped in terms of software probably. but still with this kind of like specificity that we still have, which is like still remaining unchecked sometimes. Like this is something we talked a little bit about.
Yeah, sometimes. So it's more, from our old client.
Yeah.
But yes, we still receive like some check, and it still surprised me, because so you need to have like someone to receive the check and to put the check into the bank. But yes, so for that, so we are trying, with email or catch up with, account manager team, sales team to say, hey, you can use like ACH, wire transfer, other payments method.
You can jump straight into the 21st century.
Yeah.
Fantastic. That's actually a great segue for you, Ben. I think I wanted to touch upon the thing. So, Stripe has been known for being at the forefront of like, innovation and this is something that drives us for a lot at Upflow in terms of looking at like the difference between the consumer space and the B2B space in terms of payment, right? I now do like most of my payments just with my phone. I'm actually getting out for lunch without my wallet or anything, and it's just like I don't even think on how I pay. And in a lot of occasions, right, when we buy online, when we shop, when in a lot of occasions, right? And it's still interesting to see like how far behind the B2B space still is in terms of like this complexity that we've just touched upon, and we can probably spend the entire hour talking about like how complex is that. So from your perspective, like looking at this as a payment provider and much more than this, like where is this coming from? Where is different coming from?
Yeah, great. I mean, I think you heard quite a lot from Xavier and JT around that context. So essentially, most consumer payments are relatively simple. And the card networks have actually done the other world a huge favor in terms of, in essence, really the authorization capability within a card network is a little bit like the approval flow, if you will, from a B2B perspective. So as consumers, that authorization workflow that happens really without you seeing it and that we take for granted has already been baked into the architecture. I think the key differences that we tend to see, and Stripe as a business has grown by, I think really focusing initially very much on a lot of consumer payments, although we do that, in conjunction with business partners, across the customer group that I'm responsible for. But there are usually three things that I think mark out B2B payments as being sort of different and more complex compared to consumer. The first is the need for additional information, and that might be largely sort of accounting based, and in terms of capturing that information and then flowing it through the reconciliation process that typically will trigger a payment. The other is that combined with that, there typically is some form of approval or authorization. Now that may vary depending on the contractual relationship between the parties, or alternatively the value. You may have some contractor rates where approval workflows are super simple. For higher value, perhaps bigger ticket items, then that approval workflow becomes much more complex. And then the last piece is, I think sort of JT touched on, is the timing of payment and the ability to sort of manage and manipulate that timing is really, really important. So that may be either to comply with specific sort of supplier terms based on the terms that you may have negotiated, or alternatively it may be really driven by managing your working capital really efficiently and effectively. So the ability to be able to adjust that to maximise your cash flow is really important. So those are usually the kind of three key differences that we see between B2B payments and then those that are much more consumer in nature.
And do you see Stripe going more and more into like this kind of B2B space as well, like bringing this innovation there as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Stripe's enjoyed a lot of growth from a I guess a sort of B2B to C perspective. So Shopify might be a really good example of that. And what we've seen in doing that, partnering with a lot of the big card providers and a lot of the big established sort of card networks or payment providers. But now with Stripe, you can pay on over 100 different local payment methods, and increasingly the growth that we're seeing is coming from much more B2B type of payments, and then partnering with companies like Upflow, who are then solving for a lot of that customer complexity that I just spoke about.
That's great. It's super great to hear. And I think one thing that we all agreed on, and as we were preparing the session, was the fact that like this kind of payment experience is now part of the customer experience as a whole, and we really want to make sure that like we provide the best. And I was kind of curious, like JT and Xavier, on like what are the kind of like processes that you've implemented within your organization to make that payment experience better, and what are the kind of tools that you've been using And I think that the challenge that we have here is just really realizing that, like, and that's something that is quite important for us, is looking at like finance teams not as only just, you know, as a support function and like a back office function coming after the fact, but really implemented into this overall business relationship. Like, what are the kind of tips that you could have for the CFOs and VP finance that you have here in the room?
Well, we're still old-fashioned in the ways we're getting paid. I think because we're a SaaS business, we try to do as much annual upfront as possible. So it kind of limits the number of payment options your customers are willing to use. Let's put it that way. Checks is kind of popular in the US, and yeah, we struggle with that, but we just deal with it. I think that's just a part of the game. Wire transfer is very common in Europe. So, I mean, on the way on getting paid is not that much of a problem. It's definitely more of getting actionable data on time. So we're trying to build an ecosystem or internal ecosystem to make sure that every department has actionable, data to work on. In our case, we work definitely with Upflow, but we have embedded our customer success team within the platform itself. When they have the conversations with their customers, like usual, quarterly checks and so on, they can embed that in that conversation. So it's making it less as a surprise, like if they haven't paid, they probably talk to different people than we do as well. It ties back to what Xavier said, is getting the right contacts, right people, and having a platform like Upflow is just to make sure that the new contacts, because people change within companies, is just to make sure you know who to reach out to. And definitely customer success has a stronger, entry point within the customer to talk about those things. So yes, in the end, we're being paid in a very old-fashioned way, bank transfer. I don't really know how they do it on their side, because there are multiple ways to do bank transfers. But in the end, it's just a matter of, a fully integrated process with all the departments in the company.
Yeah, it's the same at Botify, and we tried, since like years ago to improve our process. I mean, like, it's when you are sending an invoice, so it's easy to send an automatic invoice from NetSuite or from Salesforce, but you need to be sure that the invoice is correctly received and by the contact. So we are trying to so when we invoice, we send the invoice. I think that the most important part of the process is like to just maybe for like 5 days after the invoice, the email, to be sure that the invoice is correctly received. You don't have, from my point of view, to send like a dunning letter or an email to say, hey, you are late, you have to pay your invoice. Just like receive an email. Hey, I'm Xavier. I'm coming from Botify. You are the new client. So do you have like all the information from us? Do you need like more information, like a W-9 in the US, or like a bank transfer certification validation? And this just like one email can just like help, and you can like win like 10 days or like a month in terms of cash collection. So for me, the most important part is like communication just after the deal signed. So it's easy because it's coming from the sales team. But in terms of finance guy, you have to say, hello, I'm here. Do you need my help to create like my vendor portal or some stuff like that?
So JT mentioned the customer success team, and you seems to be talking a lot about like the sales team actually, and how you involve them. Is there something like even before, like do you try to kind of like optimize how your sales team is closing deals, like on the is payment terms and how they pay part of like what they have to negotiate, or do you leave them like?
Yeah, so they are able, to negotiate the billing frequency, so upfront, quarterly, or monthly. And at the same time, they are able, to negotiate the payment terms. So 30 days, 90 days, or some example like that. However, we are trying, to push the sales teams as a SaaS business, to create like more deals using the upfront payment. So for that, we are using like some commission plan definition or some incentive to be sure that we are like all set for the same objective.
Yeah. So that's really cool, because it means that like and that's something we try to push a lot in terms of thinking at Upflow around the financing should be really sitting in the business in terms of also helping designing the closing strategies. How can you be like, you know, a force in terms of saying, why is that important that like we collect like upfront payment rather than a 12-month installment and stuff? And I think it's really important, and just again being very, very proactive about that rather than just kind of reactive. JT, I think you shared some of the things, but one point that I found quite interesting was around, do you have any techniques on like trying to influence like the payment method and or the payment behavior that your customers have? It's interesting because one of our big initiatives at the moment with Upflow is to go to the Nordics. So I now know that this is not a good market for us, as you said, because people pay early or in advance. But how do we find more of those people that pay in advance? So I think everyone would be interested to know about this.
Well, I think it's an exception in the Nordics, at least based on my experience. But I think it's all part of the relationship. So it's part really of the contact you have and the expectations you set when you do either the renewal process, if you have one, or the initial sales process. So it's all about the communication, the expectations, and influence on how you can have incentives like, yes, if you pay X percent of, like in 30 days, for instance, you'll get a 5%, or the other way around. Like if you want 90 days, well, the price is bumped up. It all depends on the playbook you want to have. And sometimes, honestly, it's depending on the customer you have, like you're just like, it's your face of Goliath. You have to take what they offer, right? We had customers and they say it's 180 days, it's nothing else. So either you do business or you don't, right? So it's a decision you need to make, and it probably goes back to, you know, finance and CFO approval in that case. But it's also a matter of setting expectations, and it can be many ways. I said, you said incentives and so on. I think there's going to be more and more generalization on the market on what's acceptable, and then you can play around that. But I think everybody plays a game. I mean, if they paid 180 days, but they want to be paid, I don't know, in 30 days, something's wrong. I think you need to kind of mirror slightly what you're trying to do. It's not like you're generating money, like it's in and out all the time. So it needs to be calculated, I'd say. But the closer they are, the better it is.
Yeah, I fully agreed on that. And for you, Xavier, when you're talking about the kind of like the checks that you get, like you try to do something about it, like trying to incentivize customers to move to something else and a payment method that is more convenient, or is it just that, you know, we just accept it and yes, we have to go to the bank to deposit the checks?
So first of all, you have to accept it because, you know, it's cash, and you have like, so sales have quota, and the finance guy, I like, you know, a cash in budget. So we have to take the check, but again, so on a quarterly basis, you can like export, you know, from NetSuite which client sent you a check, and send some communication, and be sure that for the renewal or for the next invoice, they will use another payment method. Yeah.
I think for me that's something that is also quite interesting, because we always talk about like how painful it is to just handle those kind of like payment method, but there's also something for me around the security, right? Like everything that is manual, everything that is like paper-based and stuff is like relates to a lot of like security issue. And I was curious, Ben, from your perspective, like when it comes to you know, the reliability and the security of like all of those aspects. Obviously, like in the B2B space, for most of the people here in the room, like we're not managing like millions of transactions and like a day or a month, but still, like, you know, we can count like hundreds of transactions. And the problem is that when one goes wrong, it's really wrong, right? When I don't know how many times I heard the story of like that check got lost in the mail because, oh, guess what? We changed offices and the check was mailed to the previous address and we don't know where it is. And there is this kind of like conundrum with the customer saying, yes, of course I sent you the check, and no one knows. What's your perspective on that in terms of, you know, the security and the reliance of like those payment processes?
Yeah, I think back to your earlier question as well, the advance in consumer payments and the consumer payment experience, I think, is sort of setting the bar from a B2B perspective. So I think the level of kind of trust that you would wish to have in your payments provider is really built on their ability to, you know, maintain reliability, have the you know, from a regulatory and you know, a kind of excuse me, from a regulatory and, you know, and also from a customer perspective, really ensure that there's a high degree of trust in that payment process. And also, you know, there's a recognition that whilst, you know, we would strive to have a, you know, a really sort of very, very high reliability level, where sort of disputes or transactions are kind of for any reason not operating as you would expect them to be, having the ability to kind of intercept that payment, escalate, and then have a sort of support for customers to be able to resolve really, really quickly. And I think that need is much more marked in the B2B space than with a consumer perspective, largely just because of the the size of the transaction, and also potentially the kind of strategic importance of one payment potentially to your relationship to one of your key suppliers.
And I think overall we're all trying to make something like not only like more streamlined but also more secure, in the sense of we still get these questions when people so the check is an extreme example, but there's also like the fact that you still need to manually input like the amount and the recipient of like a wire transfer. And I think that's something that like makes definitely no sense in 2024. And we're trying really to take those steps so that we move to something that is like more online, more one-click type of approach. Typically, like payment initiation is something that is like should become the norm, in the sense of like it's not a question of approval and stuff, but when this is approved and when I want to pay, I don't rely on a manual process. You want to say something?
Yeah, I think it's and again, consumer payments are a really good kind of model in terms of really trying to make that payment experience really flawless, very slick and very smooth. And I think from a B2B perspective, I guess sort of challenging ourselves to do the same is the way we'd encourage everyone to think about this, which is you try to make an automated or technology-based process so much better that actually, in terms of some of those much more manual traditional ways of paying, over time it becomes really straightforward to be able to switch those over, largely just because the customer experience in terms of all the constituents in that payment process are able to process that payment more quickly, more accurately, and fundamentally quickly. And then at a business level, the benefit is better working capital, you have a more efficient finance team, whatever the benefit might be. But I think that's what we've seen from a consumer perspective, and we're now starting to see in B2B payments as well.
Just maybe for you, JT and Xavier, as operators, like sitting within your team, all of those concepts that we discussed and like how we perform around this, like, is this something that you measure and broadcast within your team? Like, is this something where you say, for example, one key indicator that we have at Upflow, we track a lot, is the payment mix, right? How, like, out of 100% of payments, how is this paid? Like, is this something that sits in the middle of your business retros or company's retro, or is this something that is not like a key priority or stuff?
Now at ParcelLab, clearly it's not a priority because 99%, I'd say, of our payments are wire, and it's just obvious. And I don't think it will be a priority in the short term. I think we have other more important topics to handle. Poor business growth, automation, improvement, efficiency.
Yeah.
So it might be somewhere down the line in the list,
but
it's not a main issue. So no, I don't think it will matter for us right now. Might be in the future if we really see issues that we need to solve differently. But in our current way of doing business, it's just not there.
And do you use that, like, just even the fact that like salespeople know like if a customer is paid or not, who is a good payer or a bad payer? Like, is this something that is readily available for the business teams, like in general?
Yes, it's important. And so, for example, at Botify, so we have like a sales meeting on Monday morning. So
some other companies have sales meetings.
It's the same everywhere. And sometimes, so I can just send like a top 10 of overdue to the sales leader to say, hey, could you just please check with your team where we are and if we have like some trouble in the implementation and some pushing back.
Yeah, that's. I think it's interesting to have this visibility, something that is often missing, and oftentimes this is not because like the customers have gone bankrupt or anything. It's just that there's usually an issue, and that's what we're trying to surface. Is also the fact that like this is related to much more than payments. This is usually the sign of like a wider problem in this respect. This was maybe my last question for you, for the panel, but for you, Ben, in terms of like, I think one thing that is interesting in the B2B, B2C space or in the consumer space is the fact that like payment is really seen as part of like a loyalty type of like thing. You think payment, you want payment to be like seamless, really like easy and stuff. Is this something that you see like coming like in the next because it's obviously not the case in the B2B space right now. What are the kind of things that changed, like in the last 20 years, in the consumer space that you could see coming to the B2B space on that respect?
Yeah, so I think historically, and I was at American Express for about sort of 14 years on the B2B side. So the way certainly a lot of the card providers would think about loyalty was buying loyalty with some form of reward, right? And that would typically be air miles, and which was the kind of original flagship method of driving loyalty, and that has now extended in sort of different forms across card issuers and card networks, but also into all sorts of other different, kind of almost sort of cash type loyalty products, depending on what it is that motivates you to stay loyal to a particular card product. I think that the next wave of innovation we saw, and Amazon would be a really good example, or Shopify, is really embedding, and Stripe's been very much at the heart of that, is embedding payment into the customer experience in the most graceful, elegant way, so that it's actually so convenient. Why would you want to do it any other way? So I think the days of just using a physical piece of plastic, associated with air miles, I think are starting to change. And also if you think about the demographic of how a lot of those consumers are now shopping, that's changed, and it's really being driven by. Stripe tends to nerd out quite a bit on that checkout experience, but really making that super, super, super slick. So I think from what we would see sort of then from a B2B perspective is actually, again, just continuing to focus on the user customer experience. So, how do I make the user of this payment process way more satisfied, much more engaged? How do I make their lives easier? How do I make it quicker? And then where they do have a dispute or an issue they need to resolve, how can we resolve that really, really quickly? So I think it's just that relentless focus on the customer experience to drive loyalty, really driven by having such a good experience that there really is almost no choice, or that user has no desire to go and use a different form of payment or a different payment process.
Yeah, I like how you put it in the sense of because it's simple, I'm also kind of inclined to just stay with this merchant vendor. There's this classic thing now about some businesses and shops still not accepting card payments, and you just there's more and more people just saying I'm actually not going to that shop anymore because a bakery not accepting card payments is just so annoying because I don't want to rely on cash. And I think what is interesting is that you can start thinking about this in the consumer space. And when you buy things online, it's very, very clear that you're trying to make sure that the payment experience is as slippery as possible, because the last thing you want is someone spending 10 minutes on your website and then ended up not buying because the credit card payments failed, right? And I think what is interesting is that we see that happening as well in the B2B space. And for example, one thing that we've seen on the rise that is really interesting is, for example, auto-pay mechanisms, where you just say, well, actually, I really like your point, JT, around saying, well, it's not a question of am I going to get paid or not? It's when am I going to get paid? And what it says behind that is the fact that most of your customers want to pay you, because otherwise you probably wouldn't have a business. And I'm just kind of shocked to see sometimes people saying I will never be on auto-pay because I don't trust. Or I don't trust my vendor, when it's actually your lawyers or some people with whom you've been working for a very, very long time. And so I think this kind of how do you process that, and whether this is as early in the process of selling or as part of the recurring payment, something that is super, super important. I guess it's super hard on the enterprise segment to have any of those auto-pay mechanisms, right? It's impossible right at the moment.
No, it's impossible, and we are not using it.
Okay. And is that something that you anticipate at some point, as part of your...
We have some smaller customers on a monthly kind of billing schedule, so they kind of accept a bank mandate pretty much. But on a global scale, if you have a higher average invoice value, it's not something they're willing to accept because it's quarterly or annual. They kind of forget about it. So, I'd love to. But I think it's part of a bit of paradigm and paradox, or in a lot of customers, they're happy to be auto-paid, but they will not auto-pay.
Yeah.
So it's you can't expect people to have a different behavior from yours, but that's the ideal world, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's definitely part of trust, as you're saying. It's closer to your cash, and you decide when it goes out, and hopefully it comes as quickly as possible in.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting because I think one of the complexities we have in the B2B space is that it's not a one size fits all type of exercise, right? You can't say, well, all of my customers are going to be on that payment method or the other. And then comes like with diversity comes the complexity as well of like managing different payment methods, different type of customers, different currencies, etc. And maybe that would be like a kind of a closing kind of question, because we touched upon this, Xavier, like before in our preparation. But I think one of the challenges as you grow and as you discover like new cases is the fact that like you probably need to handle like a lot of different customers, different tools, like portals, for example. But one thing that you touch upon is the fact that like what is very important for you is the ability to just add like new software or new pieces or new module as you grew. Is this something that was key for you in terms of like the Botify growth and like how you kind of like implemented like your overall stack, like your finance stack, to better serve your customers?
So now when we want, to implement a new product, the product needs to be native or linked to NetSuite. Okay. Because we really want, to have like, NetSuite is like the base, and then we add like a lot of module. But this is like, for example, if you want to change our like travel and expenses tools, the data needs to be put automatically into NetSuite. This is like really mandatory, and this is how we can scale like a finance team in a company than Botify. Yeah.
And when it comes to customer payments, for example, like what are the kind of things that you've implemented? Like, and Upflow is one of them, but like, is there any other like kind of software that you've implemented, like they were directly connected to your existing stack, like for them to pay you better?
No.
No. Okay. JT, just was like any other thing in terms of growing the business?
I completely agree. I'm a big believer of the best of breed.
Yeah.
So I like to select tools that will fit one specific purpose, one or more, but usually it's one specific purpose, and it has to integrate ideally natively, because then you're not responsible for the integration, but it has to integrate with your other stack. And that's the only way, in my opinion, that you can grow a business without scaling the finance team in the exact same pace. You can do a lot with a very small and lean, efficient finance team, and you can grow your business from, actually a lot for a couple of years before you need to change anything. So whatever tool you choose, I think you need to select the proper tools for a specific purpose, and they just need to talk to each other, which comes back to the actionable items and data I mentioned earlier. They need to talk flawlessly amongst each other.
It's interesting what you're saying, because one of the key things that we look at when we try to identify like good customers and good companies for us is like, finance teams are trying to grow their business without growing their headcount, because we definitely see like usually in the technology industry some efficiencies of scale when they use the right stack, as opposed to, well, I actually have 20 people or 15 people crunching like spreadsheets or just doing manual email or processing manual payments. Like we have one customer the other day was telling us that like there was a process where they need to send a manual link for each customer for them to actually pay, which seems to be total nonsense. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much for like sharing all of that. I think it's super helpful to see like this, for me, this B2B space like really evolving, like, and one of the challenges is that I think it's evolving really slowly. Everyone would wish to have like a kind of a magic wand and coming overnight and say, hey, we have all of those magic payment methods now. And the reality is just that it's just impossible. It's like step by step, and you need to do these incremental steps towards like what probably is going to be the world in 2050, where there is probably no more checks, there's probably no more manual entry, but like how do we get there is definitely not an easy one. So thanks so much for sharing those insights. I don't know if we have any questions from the Zoom and people that are online, or if there's any question in the room, would be happy to take them as well.
Actually do have a few questions here from our Slack channel. If I am a business that is getting paid completely offline, how do I start transitioning to online payments?
It's a good question. Who do you want to take this one?
Well, I think it really depends on what you're selling and how you sell it. That's number one. Most of tools that you can use to send invoices actually do have embedded online possibilities. They could connect to Stripe, which is usually the case. And then depending on what you're willing to accept in terms of payment methods, it's always a willingness. And it's something we discussed as well, Alex. It comes at cost, and how, what's the trade-off between the cost versus the benefits. So that's also, it's a business decision in the end. But most tools, any modern accounting system, I'd say, or off-the-shelf accounting system would allow you to accept online payments.
And most of the benefits I think that probably JT had in mind would be, the ability to be able to enter new markets, the ability to be able to scale, focus on your core business, and a payment gateway or provider such as Stripe is really designed to help kind of abstract a lot of that complexity and workload, away from that company. So that might be sort of technical infrastructure, but it typically would also be all of the regulatory considerations that you'd need to be bearing in mind in terms of being able to launch in new markets.
Yeah, and I think one thing that is quite interesting is that oftentimes we try to get already to the very level 5 of very advanced, we're trying to micromanage everything, but the reality is that what I found is that for finance teams, just getting started on maybe just offering card payments is even quite hard, and there's a lot of sort of preconceived ideas around what works and what doesn't work. My favorite example is for example, is cards in the US. When European businesses go to the US, they say, well, it's actually we are an enterprise business, so we're not going to offer card payment because it's never going to work. The reality is that, and I think our CFO is in the room here, our largest invoice at Upflow ever, was paid by card in the US, right? And it's because they had a very specific program and they wanted us to pay, and they actually negotiated with us. They wanted to pay by card, which was, at that time, we didn't have the convenience fees mechanism in Upflow. Very costly for us. But again, as you said, Xavier, when the money is in the bank, you're just not going to send it back because you want to be paid somewhere else. But just offering this is not always easy. And the other thing that I would say to this question that I think is quite interesting is also the fact, and I've had this feedback from one of the CFO from another great company in the US, 1,000 employees, and they said, look, we're enterprise, the minimum annual contract value is at least 20K a year, and it goes up to 500K. Whenever someone is signing a contract, we ask them to sign a direct debit, a mandate, right? ACH direct debit. And of course, some of them say no, but you would be surprised to see how many of them actually just sign the contract and also sign the direct debit mandate. And what is interesting is that it's not that they're going to charge crazy amounts and everything. They have a very well-oiled process around a month before the renewal invoice is going to be sent. They reach out to them. They tell you exactly how it's going to be. They send them the invoice before. They notify them before they're being paid. They're being charged, but they're being charged on time. And I think that's this kind of practical tips that a lot of people say because they think that that a few or maybe some customers are not going to accept it. They're just not doing it when I think they should. Because if you have 20%, 30% of your customers on cards, on autopay, or on direct debit, that makes a massive change to your DSO. And that's something that is very important. That's good. Thank you for that. Do you have any other question?
We do. We have another question here. I think Xavier and JT both touched on it. How can finance teams working with their other departments, other business teams like CS and sales kind of improve the customer experience?
Mm-hmm.
No, I think that the most important fight is cash collection, is a team goals. So for example, when we have a new clients, so the invoice is sent by the financier. But if we have some problem in terms of cash collection, the sales will be in charge of the collection of the first invoice because he has, to find the way and as the discussion with the client. We don't want to have multiple point of contact at Botify, so we are trying, to keep one contact for the new business. And for the renewal, so again, we are trying, to keep in touch with the CSM team and the account manager team. So it could be informal, when we are on the cafeteria, we can just chat. Hey, this client is late. Could you please check, or when do you have the next meeting with the guy? And yes, it just like a teaching lesson on pedagogy in France, and just to make sure that cash is the first goal of the company, and we need to keep a good level of cash collection.
I couldn't say better. Definitely, it's part of the relationship I think you have with the customer, no matter where the touch point is. And if there's a reason why it's being paid late, you kind of need to figure out why and take action again on that. So first invoice or renewal, whatever. If they don't pay and it's at least an existing customer, something's wrong and you need to figure it out. And then you can probably decide. It becomes a business decision and not a finance topic.
Yeah, I love your tips around this is something we do as well, having the sales, like sending the first invoice, just ensuring that like the thing is paid is also like a good way to kind of align everyone around this idea that like, well, it's actually great to close some deals and close some renewals, but it's also great to get the cash in the door as well. So that's something that is kind of like super important. And to be honest, like I think another tip that we've seen implemented with some of our users was actually giving incentives to their team. So whether account managing or CSMs to actually move towards like payment processes that are in favor of the company. So, for example, how do you give an incentive for your CS team so that they move contracts on an annual or on a multi-year contract? That's something that has a lot of impact. We've seen some companies growing successfully just relying on like the working capital just being financed by upfront like contract. When you're growing and you are able to collect like upfront contracts, that's a massive game. But I think the point that's just coming back to this idea that like if you don't have, and you mentioned that earlier, Xavier, the fact that like if you don't have this data available, if you're not even tracking it, right, there's no way you can improve it, right? And I think that's what we see with a lot of companies, right?
Yeah, no, it's difficult. So this is why you need to know as soon as possible that the invoice is correctly sent to the perfect contact.
Yeah,
and,
the invoice itself, and then even the overall performance of your cash collection, right?
Yeah.
Like I think just leading, it was obvious for you. You were talking about your DSO earlier and say we move our DSO from X to X, from X to Y. That's great, but like you would be surprised to see how many people we're talking to, they just have no idea of like what a DSO is, and when they know what DSO means, like how much is this?
Yeah,
right?
so this is why we are trying at group level to do some communications about the cash performance at the end of a quarter or at the end of a year, and we are trying to explain and give like more visibility or like typical KPIs. What is a DSO? What is the calculation of the metrics? And just to give like more visibility to everyone at Botify, and be sure that they keep in mind that it's really important to update the CRM and doing all of the sales cycle.
Great. Do you have a contest and a best employee of the month for the cash collection? Not yet.
Not yet.
Good. Is there any other question, or is there any question in the room or with us? Yes.
Maybe this is more of a question. Do you want to come over for the people on Zoom?
Thank you. So maybe this is more a question for you two, is about the payments behaviors in terms of geographies. So you mentioned that Botify was Europe, US, APAC, and well, Ben, obviously at Stripe, there's a lot of geographies. What are the typical differences you see in terms of behaviors of payments across, SMB, enterprise, in those geographies, and habits maybe, or things that are changing there?
You have 1 hour.
I mean, maybe just to start with Alex's point, I think certainly in the US, card payment is, particularly for B2B, is more common. And I kind of, that's not just something I've experienced at Stripe, but if I go back to my kind of American Express days, you would see typically kind of high value invoices being paid on, there's a bunch of different products. So things like purchasing cards, sort of virtual cards, I think have become way more popular, largely because you can kind of embed quite a lot of control mechanisms. You can specify transaction value, date, all that kind of stuff. So I broadly say in the US, you see a lot more card payment for high value. Once you come into Europe, you've also then got different sort of expectations around timing of payment and sort of reconciliation, and also kind of tax reporting. Say markets like Germany, bit more complex, say, than the UK. And that then, has a knock-on impact on what's the sort of preferred method of payment that a business will either request or require to be paid by.
I think it depends also on the banking infrastructure. Still an old-fashioned bank. We still need them. But when you look at how we can do wires in Europe versus how you do wires in the US, it's a no-brainer. I mean, it's so easy in Europe. Most of it you can do on your phone. US from my experience. So I haven't been in every American bank, but still a bit of a pain to get it done. I said it's manual input and address, finding the right zip code and that kind of stuff. It's not as streamlined and easy as in Europe. So maybe, in my opinion, that's why bank wires are still very common in Europe. And it's being pushed much more and more from accounting system where you do a batch of payments and just upload it in the bank. And you still need the good old signatures and power of attorneys for to sign those, which is the human side, which is probably troublesome sometimes.
Yeah, nothing to add. In the US, maybe you need more information to generate like a wire transfer. So this is why you can have like some discrepancy.
I think like regardless of like whether some countries are better than others and currencies or payment method, one thing that I found quite interesting is that oftentimes like you just go in a country and then discovering how this is going to impact like your payment behavior is an afterthought. You just figure that after. And sometimes this is something that, especially for large deal and enterprise customers, when the payment methods actually have a huge impact on like your working capital, your growth requirements, something that should be thought like quite a lot before, right? And this is something the pattern we've seen quite often, typically with American companies going into Europe, where they actually go to Europe assuming that like this is going to be like similar to the US, and the other way around works as well. With us, like European companies going to the US, but it's just that like you actually realize that you need sometimes to roll out a full infrastructure to actually just get paid, because no one is going to pay you by ACH when you're in Europe, right? And sometimes you just discover that after you send the first invoices, someone is telling you like, hey, where do I pay? And I think that's something that is important to remember as well. Typically, like one of the vision we have at Upflow in partnership with Stripe is this ability to just roll out like all of those payment methods that are the right method for the right customer and the right geography when you need it. I think that's one of the challenges. So yeah, it's something important around the specificities around different geographies and countries. Maybe one last question. Oh, everyone is shy.
I have one from the chat.
Ah, nice. Good.
It's kind of a good follow-up. Are there trends around enterprise companies paying late? So do you guys have any tips around how to get payments from your enterprise customers? There's laughs coming from the room.
Well, I think it comes back to what I said. It's negotiated payment terms. If you expect them and it's just on the order form, on the contract says 30 days, but internally they have a 60 days policy, you can dream on getting paid in 30 days. It's just never going to happen. And that's part of the information you need to collect upfront from the sales process or whatever, not blaming salespeople for once, but still it's just a matter of knowing. I had a customer in a previous job, they said 180 days, and it's not a myth. It's 180 days. So it's half a year before you're getting paid. And you're delivering your services, obviously, for 6 months. So for 6 months, you're working for free. And then you hope that you're actually going to get your cash in 180 days. And you do. But 6 months from there, you're like already in the renewal period pretty much. So you're always running behind your money. But it comes back to what I said. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So if you have the assurance you're actually getting paid, that's already a big problem. That's solved pretty much.
Any other tip, Xavier?
No.
We said it all.
Yeah, no, I'm in line with you, and maybe you can try to find another way, to discuss with your contact. You sometimes, if you are asking, to your exec member to be in touch, with the decision maker in the company, it should help. But again, it's always a fight for sometimes, and you need to do your best to find the best contact.
Yeah, I think one thing that we often see, and we now have the data out of Flow looking at this, is just also looking at the fact that like a lot of people love to talk about like this mighty and ugly enterprise customers that really doesn't want to pay you, but the reality is it's like sometimes companies make it really, really hard for them to actually pay, or for the customers to pay them. And I think it's also like we'd be surprised to see, like you mentioned that earlier, but how many invoices are sent to someone who's just left the business, right? And well, actually, you're not going to get paid, I can tell you, because this invoice went nowhere, or just like not having the proper follow-up and everything is also like, I think, a good tip to get paid on time. What I think is interesting to this question is that when you start thinking of like how you can get paid faster by these enterprise customers, you will often see that like the very same customers that are like mindful of like cash on balance sheet at the end of the year and trying to really start thinking about optimizing this are also the one that think quite a lot when you offer them like a good deal for paying earlier, or kind of like a penalty for paying later and everything. And if you start like incorporating that can have an effect. So I would also really encourage like the finance teams to sit down with the business team and the sales team mostly to just say, hey, like we need to get paid faster, and maybe some of them will never accept this. But if you say, well, okay, cool, the payment terms are 180 days. Well, if you pay like within 90 days, we can give you like a discount. That's something that may work, right? And we do that all the time, and like on the sales, like I'm putting my sales hat for a second, but we do that all the time when we're closing deals, and we say, oh, you're not paying upfront, you want a quarterly payments? Yes, of course, but it's a 10% increase, right? We do that all the time. So I think this overall strategy should be thought like as a proactive approach, not as a reactive one, which is a classic thing that we have around this whole topic around payments and cash collection. But yeah, thank you so much for the questions. And thank you so much for being on the panel today. It was really a pleasure. So just for all of you to know, this is the first time that we meet JT in person after years of feedback, positive feedback, improvements, and stuff. So we're really happy to have you today, and always happy to have those events around like our users, not only around like our product and only our product. Ben, thank you so much for coming, and to the overall Stripe team as well. We're very, very happy to partner with you to. I think one thing that is super important for us is kind of like this vision that like the payment rails are there. We've been talking about this like for a while, like everything modern, like being paid on card, on ACH debit, on everything is just there. The question is just like, how do we bring that to these people in the room, like the VP finance and CFOs of like companies that are like actually struggling with like, how do I move to this kind of like modern payment method? So, I think it's a great partnership, and we're really excited to be working with you. We're very, very happy as a team at Upflow today to kind of like first announce the release of like what we call Payments by Upflow, which is our own payment gateway powered by Stripe. And the idea behind that is that we started with the SaaS product that is around managing your accounts receivable, but only from a SaaS perspective, and we're now moving to embedding payments into those workflows, and that's something that is super important for us. And part of the vision we've had from the get-go when we started Upflow around this is not only about sending reminders and tracking analytics, it's also about implementing better payments. And that's something that we're super proud of. And also very happy to share with you today, and we've announced it this morning, that we raised a 5 million Series A extension funding so that we could kind of like finance and GTM this new payment gateway. And we're very excited about like the impact that it's going to have for our users. So again, thank you so much for coming, everyone. It's a good day for us at Upflow, and good day for us to be sharing that with our users and partners. Thanks for coming. And I'm sorry for people on the Zoom. There is not going to be drinks for you right now, but here in Paris, there was going to be some drinks. So please enjoy, and have a great evening, everyone. Thank you so much.